It all starts with a difficult feeling to name, a void, a strangeness before the routine itself. A moment when what was familiar becomes suddenly strange. You wake up, brush your teeth, drink coffee, go to work. But something about you has moved. This is what Albert Camus calls the feeling of the absurd. The realization that we live as if there was a clear meaning, but no one has ever given us that sense. We were pushed into an existence we didn't explain, and we pretend normality, as if that were natural. Camus says that the absurd is born of the confrontation between two poles, human desire for clarity, for reason, for purpose, and the impassive silence of the universe. We want answers, but there is no one on the other side to answer them. This is the wound that opens the philosophical path, the rupture, the moment we realize that life alone explains nothing, and then comes the question, if life is absurd, why keep living? Camus offers no escape. It offers no consolation. On the contrary, it requires that we will face the nonsense front, no masks, no religion, no promises of salvation. The lucidity is painful, but it is the only true beginning. If the universe does not respond, if existence does not give us guarantees, if every effort of understanding bumps into silence, why not give up? This is the most intimate question of Camus' philosophy. Is life worth living, even without meaning? And his answer is brutal, but beautiful. Yes, precisely because there is no meaning. For Camus, the greatness of the human being is not in finding an objective meaning, but in challenging its own emptiness with dignity. This is where he proposes a radical gesture, the revolt. But not a destructive, nihilistic revolt. It is a silent and constant revolt, an act of standing in the face of chaos, to look at the absurdity with lucidity, and yet, I will continue. This revolt is not against the world. It is against the temptation to surrender to apathy. It is against the desire to escape consciousness. It is a faithfulness to life, even when it explains nothing. Live without metaphysical appeals, without comforting illusions, without needing future promises to justify the present. Camus calls this tragic freedom, the freedom of those who recognize the absurd, but chooses to dance anyway, as Sisyphus pushing its mountain stone above and finding, in their own efforts, a form of happiness. Because when you accept that the universe has no sense, something extraordinary happens. All currents fall. You are free to invent your own way of existing, free to build a purpose, not in response, but as creation. And this is the revolt that makes us human. Choose to live, even when nothing requires you to it. Choose to love, even knowing that everything is passenger. Choose to create, even if the world is crumbling. This is Camus's answer to the absurd, the dignity of a yes, said in silence, every day. Given the absurd, the first impulse is not to face. It is to run away. Camus knew that. And that is why he begins his philosophy not with courage, but with the denunciation of the lies we tell ourselves not to face the emptiness. The first illusion is the religious, the idea that there is a superior sense waiting for us, that the suffering here is part of a larger plane, that there is a God who sees, who cares, who rewards. Camus does not deny the comfort this brings, but asks, do you believe why it's true, or why are you afraid of the alternative? For him, to appeal to the transcendent is to betray the absurd, is to refuse the silence of the universe, inventing answers to support the noise of despair itself. The second escape is philosophical suicide. It is when the subject, even though he believes anything, decides to live as if you believe, creates empty values, accepts rules without question. It follows the crowd. But inside, it is broken. It is life, lived as theater, where everyone interprets papers and no one knows who it is anymore. The third illusion is constant entertainment. Today, more than ever, she swallows us. We don't need gods. We have screens. We don't need faith. We have distraction. The nonsense need not be faced if the mind is always busy. Camus via this a form of collective falling, A world where people don't live, just react. Roll feeds, buy things, repeat ideas. They fill the time until death interrupts them. And he shouted with tenderness and anger, "This is not living. That is to escape." The courage for him begins at the very moment we stopped running away. When we face the void with our eyes open, no consolation, no excuses, only you, the world, and the silence. This is where something new begins to be born. Not an answer, but a disposition, to be alive in full, even without guarantees, even without whys. Imagine a man condemned by the gods rolling a mountain stone above, to see her plummet whenever she reaches the top, and then start over, for all eternity. This man is Sisyphus, and for Camus he is the perfect portrait of the human being in the face of absurdity. Life requires us effort. Every day we climbed our mountains, waking up, working, solving, supporting, continuing. And when we think we arrived somewhere, the stone falls again. The routine starts over, the sense fades, and the question comes back, why all this? Camus does not offer a consolation. He does not say that there is a sky waiting at the end, even if there will be a time when the stone will stop falling. On the contrary, he looks at the myth and says something shocking. You have to imagine happy Sisyphus. But how? How can anyone be happy knowing that everything will be repeated forever? Camus replies, because he knows, because he is lucid, because he stopped waiting. And as you stop waiting, it starts choosing. Sisyphus is no longer deceived. He does not roll the stone by faith or hope. He rolls the stone because he chose to live anyway. This is the true act of rebellion. Do not deny the absurd, but embrace it. Do not ask for meaning from life, but make sense of the gesture of continuing. The moment Sisyphus goes down the mountain, sweaty, tired, knowing you will start over, he is stronger than his punishment, because he turned him into choice, so we can live, aware of repetition, aware of the absence of guarantees, but still committed to the act of living, not by duty, not for belief, but for freedom, the freedom of those who understand that the greatness is not in the result, but in the way we face the way. Camus claimed that the awakening of consciousness is always painful. That's when you realize that manuals don't work, that the promises are not fulfilled. May the formulas of happiness not rid you of the restlessness. That's when the question why, it echoes too high. Why get out of bed? Why work so much? Why love if everything can end? Why live if everything ends in death? These questions do not only arise in times of crisis, they live with us, even when stuffy. But at certain times, a deep silence, a sudden loss, a feeling of emptiness in the middle of an ordinary day, they take the center of the stage. And then consciousness expands. You see what you once avoided seeing, that the world does not have a ready script. That existence is in itself a last mystery without last explanation. Camus calls this the feeling of the absurd. It is not an intellectual idea. It is a body sensation. It is the strangeness in the face of life that follows, but without rails. But here is the point. For Camus, this awakening should not lead to despair, should lead to lucidity. It is when you understand that there is no given meaning, that the deepest invitation of all may arise to create meaning. Awareness of the absurd does not paralyze you, it gives you new responsibility. Live without illusions, and yet live with intensity. It is at this point that authentic freedom begins, not the freedom to do everything you want, but the freedom to build a meaning that is yours, even knowing that he is neither eternal nor absolute. It is in this space that the artist, the lover, the thinker, the rebel is born. People who know that the universe is indifferent, but it chooses yet to dance within the silence. For Camus, the true hero of existence is not what he finds meaning, but what refuses to give up, even when you can't. This is the angry man, not in the aggressive, destructive sense, but in its purest form. One who refuses to give in to the indifference of the universe, he who looks at the nonsense facing and decides to continue. Camus' revolt is not shouting against the world. It is continuing to walk without guarantees. It is affirming life even without promises of salvation. That's why he says, there is no destination that does not overcome itself by contempt. What does he mean? That when you accept the absurd, it no longer dominates you. You carry it as Sisyphus carries your stone, but now with conscience. The angry man is the one who says, yes, everything is fragile, passenger, and uncertain, but even so, I choose to live. I choose to love, create, resist, not because there is a prize at the end, but because this is what makes me human now. This is the essence of absurd freedom, the freedom of not having to justify each step with a cosmic narrative, the freedom to be whole, even knowing that everything can crumble. And this freedom has a strange taste. She scares, but also releases. Because when you understand that nothing is guaranteed, you stop waiting for the world's permission to fully exist. You create, you transform, you act not because there is a final sense, but because when acting, you make sense to happen. This is what Camus calls metaphysical revolt, an act of courage that does not rest on certainty, but it blooms anyway, amid the desert of the nonsense. If there is no superior plan, if the universe is indifferent, if no response will come from heaven, then what remains for us? According to Camus, we have total freedom, but this freedom is not comfortable. She is wild, raw, without map. It is the freedom to be solely responsible for your life, to know that there is no definitive excuse, no destination to blame, no instruction manual. You are alone with your conscience, and all you do or stop doing is part of the world you are creating. Is this a burden? Perhaps. But it is also the biggest chance of authenticity you will have. If nothing is written, you can write. If nothing is guaranteed, each gesture matters. If there is no salvation, then every human meeting, every sincere affection, every honest creation becomes sacred, even if it does not last forever. Camus saw life as an absurd work of art, no sense given but full of constructed meaning. Living for him is like being the artist of a sculpture that will never be finished. But that doesn't make the process smaller, it makes it more precious. This is where hope reappears, not as certainty of victory, but as rebellion against nihilism, like the daily decision to get up, even if the floor is collapsing, like the choice of loving, even if everything is over, as the statement that if the universe is indifferent, then we will be intense. Camus believed that this absurd freedom was the true turning point, the moment when the human being, freed from the need to find meaning, starts to create meaning with their own steps. It is not an easy life, but it is perhaps the only worthy of being called human. The absurd for Camus is not the end. It is the beginning of a life without illusions, a life where we no longer need to expect eternal answers, because we find that the questions are enough to move us. What was once despair is now impulse. The fall becomes a flight, and the silence of the universe. In freedom to write our own song, to live, then, is not to understand everything. It is continuing, even without understanding. It is laughing in the middle of chaos. It is to love even if time destroys. It is creating beauty even if it does not last. It is existing as if it were a choice each day, not a condemnation. Camus reminds us, the true hero of the absurd is the one who, in the face of the lack of meaning, still chooses to live with passion, not by naive hope, but for a deep, silent, and absolutely free courage. If this video has resonated inside you, share it with someone who needs to rediscover this inner fire. Comment down here. What do you do even when everything doesn't seem to make sense? How do you deal with this silence of the universe? Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the bell, because here, every week, we get the questions that nobody wants to ask, and perhaps find together a more true way of living. We see each other in the next dive.